Rowe and James McQueen, and then we'll work our way down.
Wonderful.
Welcome back, Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Great to be with you again a few hours later after the last time I was here with you. I'll go ahead and get started. Senator Chairman Penske and Vice Chair Kagan, members of the committee, Senator Reedy here for the record to present to you SJ 8, U.S. Constitution Amendments Convention, Limitations on Federal Power. This is the Article 5 bill dealing with us, and I'll get into that a little bit, dealing with us exercising our state legislative authority under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. This resolution is being presented to offer a structural solution to a structural problem. It offers the chance to restore the balance of powers in our federal system by using our state legislative constitutional authority under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. The activities of Washington, D.C. today would have been unimaginable to the founders of our country. Federal laws and regulations now touch upon every aspect of our lives, from what kind of light bulbs we buy, to farming practices, to school curriculum, to health care. Meanwhile, we live under the shadow of a crushing national debt that threatens to envelop our grandchildren and their children. And this has been a bipartisan problem with plenty of blame to go around. This bill, incidentally, has been introduced in the past during both parties' administrations. So I think it's important to point that out before we come here. I've not introduced it before. I have co-sponsored in the past. It's been a bipartisan problem, the issue that we see with national debt and with federal government involvement in our daily lives. In addition, the Supreme Court through past decades has vastly expanded federal power through its precedents with frequently willing accomplices in Congress and the executive branch, again, in both parties. The Supreme Court's created loopholes to the Constitution's limit on federal power, and those loopholes will remain there until someone closes them. By design, that someone is supposed to be us as elected state legislatures. In their wisdom, our founders predicted that this very situation would actually arise over time. Toward the very end of the Constitutional Convention, George Mason specifically predicted that the federal government would one day overpower the states. And they were concerned about that, the founders were, and that's why they insisted that an Article 5 amendment be included, that Article 5 be included as a way for states to propose constitutional amendments through a state-controlled convention. George Mason's proposal was adopted without dissent, and this final version of Article 5 gave the states the ultimate constitutional power, the power to unilaterally amend the Constitution of the United States without the consent of Congress. Now, it's a very high bar to clear. The way it works is 2/3 of state legislatures, now 34, pass resolutions applying for a convention to propose amendments on the same topic, which serves as the meeting agenda. Each state chooses and instructs its delegation of commissioners who attend the meeting, work with other state delegations to hammer out possible amendment proposals on the topics that were specified by the 34 state applications. Because they act as agents of the state legislature, the commissioners only have legal authority to act pursuant to that specified agenda and only to act in pursuance of their legislature's instructions. Every state gets one vote. Any proposals that are supported by a majority of the states at the convention then go back to the states for ratification. Now, only when 38 states ratify our proposal can it become part of our Constitution. By passing the resolution before you, Maryland would be raising our hand to say, yes, we believe it's time for the states to gather to consider proposing amendments that will rebalance federal power with state power. Specifically, the Article 5 convention, called pursuant to SJ 8, would be limited to 3 topics for amendment proposals. Amendments that impose common sense fiscal discipline on the federal government. Amendments that, again, responsibly limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and amendments that set term limits for federal officials, including or possibly limited to federal judges, as well as department heads. Let me be clear in my comments here today. This does not mean that the convention must propose an amendment on each of these topics. Rather, these topics describe the outer limit of what would be germane to that convention. Now, you might ask, what is my motivation for introducing this legislation now, this year? And I would say for me personally, it's not just because of the central idea of the need to limit and reorder the federal government's hold on local and state governments, although I think that's very important. My motivation for really engaging with this issue for the first time is by watching what's happened in our country, and it's not just in 2020, and really not even just in 2016, But the out-of-control vitriol and lack of trust that has surged in the past decade to 2 decades in national politics, who is in the White House and who controls Congress, has taken on what should be outsized importance, because the federal government's power has surged to the point where one side fears the other will drastically and punitively change the other side's way of life irrevocably. And I believe part of the solution to this rancor is to calm and lower the stakes by purposely restoring the proper balance of power to the government entities closest to the people, more nimble, efficient, responsive in addressing specific day-to-day problems than the federal government is. And we've seen it throughout the entire pandemic. State and local governments are much more able to respond in a targeted fashion. It's just an example. So the Convention of States Action Maryland is an all-volunteer organization. It represents hundreds of volunteers and over 28,000 supporters all across Maryland. Some of them have come to testify today. I would ask you to take to heart what they say, and we ask for a favorable report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Is it Riley?
Thank you. Mr. Chair, my name is Michael Riley. I'm the State Director for Maryland Convention of States Action, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to rebuilding a culture of self-governance in America. We are over 28,000 Marylanders who have signed up to support our resolution calling for a Convention of States under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to discuss and propose constitutional amendments involving a limited set of topics. These are federal fiscal restraint, federal overreach, and term limits for federal officials, including Congress. Our numbers have doubled in the past 2 years because Marylanders are coming to realize that serious challenges require serious tools, and an Article 5 Convention of States is a powerful tool. Once 34 states pass the same resolution, we will have the convention. Any amendments to the Constitution proposed by the convention will have to be ratified by 38 states to actually become part of the Constitution. My colleagues will give more details about why we need the convention and how it works, but I say America is ready for this convention. I believe that a convention of states is the right tool to bring us together as a country. When the convention meets, the whole thing will be put under a microscope. Pundits will argue about every point made during the debate. There will be a tornado of social media activity. America will hold a national discussion about where we are, where we're going, and who we want to be as a country. Given the challenges that we face, this discussion is long overdue. If Massachusetts can pass the resolution to the floor for debate, so can we in Maryland. Please support our resolution calling for an Article 5 Convention of States. And I thank all our supporters who made it here today. Mr. Chair.
Ms. Perot? No?
I'm Leslie Jenkins.
Okay, hold on. Mr. McQueen, are you up there? Please.
I didn't know. Go ahead.
Senators, I am James McQueen, Senior, born and raised in Maryland. I'm a Southern Maryland Regional Captain for the Convention of States, speaking for our region's 3,154 supporters. How did we end up here? The Constitution of the United States' sole function was to define the exercise of government and limit governmental powers. History has shown that government bureaucracy adds burdens and limitations on the people. Today, the amended Constitution of the United States is over 3,000 pages. And civil servants, civil authorities, don't pledge to a government, they pledge to the principles of a constitution. Can anyone pledge the oath truly and understand everything in this book, 3,000 pages? What does oath mean to you, to us? We escaped Great Britain's ruling class due to the tyranny, overreach, and religious persecution, and founded the United States of America based on the tenets of freedom from government rule. Now, again, ruling class are killing the free society with malice, controlling everything in our culture and government bureaucracy. Today, we see the American flag, and we feel sometimes the owner is a terrorist or an extremist and not a proud patriot. Something's wrong. Don't silence the 28,000 Maryland patriots that are counting on you to hear their fear, their grief, and hope. Please, Southern Maryland, shuck the bureaucracy so our nation can turn from its path of destruction. Why can't you and we stand up for the principles of our Constitution? Vote for SJ 8 to move out of committee onto the floor for an honest debate. Thank you for your time.
I missed your name.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you had called names, but,
No, I didn't,
Okay.
actually. I didn't have his panel marked correctly on my sheet, so.
okay.
And I should, after that, have Mr. Seth Lipko, if he's here, and then we'll take questions. Please.
Okay, I can go?
Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Senators. I am Leslie Jenkins, and I'm a Maryland volunteer for the Convention of States. Article 5 was given to the citizens of this nation as a tool to be used when the government has become despotic. Our founders said that this method of amending the Constitution will probably never be resorted to unless the federal government should betray symptoms of corruption. Symptoms don't even begin to describe the problems our nation has right now. You have to be willfully ignorant to not see the corruption and the progression into a socialist country that we have become. Or maybe you do, and this is exactly what you would like to see happen. Article 5 is to be used and at our disposal instead of a last-minute ditch effort to expedient measures to try and rein in the federal government once it has crossed the barrier of no return. If this occurs, we would then be at the mercy of some radical and ineffectual measures that have no guarantee to retain our freedoms. I applaud the founders in their wisdom to provide this safe and peaceable measure by calling for a convention of states. The abuse of power, when allowed to go unchecked, brings about greed and corruption as we are seeing today. Article 5 is the remedy. This is indeed one of the greatest beauties of the system, and it should strongly be recommended to every candid mind to understand the wisdom behind Article 5. The Constitution of any government, which cannot be regularly amended when it has gone off the rails, reduces the people to two dilemmas. One is they either submit to the oppressions, or two, they bring about amendments, more or less by a civil war. The Convention of States and its petition signers have seen the progression towards the destruction of our country. We are educating ourselves on the lack of leadership to maintain and secure our rights. Our leaders are choosing to follow a communist doctrine that is enriching their lives instead of retaining our liberty. To do that, they have to take their self-governing power from the people and the states so that they can be the only reigning authority. We are trying to avoid the radical remedy and be proactive with a peaceful remedy.
Thank you.
Which our Constitution gives us through Article 5.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Lipko, if you want to take a seat, and then we'll take questions for that first panel.
I am Seth Lipko. I live in District 32, and I represent about 650 other supporters in my district. I've invested my personal time in the Convention of States movement because of my children and my concern for their future. I want my kids to grow up in a better world than I was raised in, with brighter futures and more bountiful opportunities. And I'm sure all of you do too. What I've seen in the area of financial freedom isn't just stagnation, but digression from that goal as a result of the fiscal irresponsibility of the federal government. As you heard earlier, this isn't a partisan issue. Regardless of which party has a majority, we the people are at the mercy of their expensive ambitions. With each passing administration, their agenda takes priority over economic stability, and it's at the expense of the hard-earned incomes of families like mine. The answer is not increased taxation. We can't spend ourselves out of debt. The answer is not more federal assistance programs. They cost hundreds of millions, and they result in our greater dependence on their existence. I mean, how's Social Security looking right about now? I hope all of you will be able to benefit from my contributions into that broken program, because I sure won't. So what's the answer? It's you putting fiscal restraints on them. Every average American family has to learn how to budget and prioritize their needs as a basic survival skill, Every business has to do the same in order to stay open and to profit. It's time the feds start holding that same responsibility as the people who have to fund their irresponsibility. They've had decades to fix this problem, and they continue heading in the wrong direction. They have to be held accountable. You, this committee, the Senate of Maryland, hold that power constitutionally to enforce that accountability. And as our representatives, I ask you to support a convention of states to impose fiscal restraint on the U.S. government. For the sake of our children and grandchildren who are already in bondage to the accumulating federal debt, we must put an end to this irresponsibility. Please move SJ8 out of committee and be part of the solution. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take questions. We're going to have one person respond to the question. We're not going to have 6 people. Senator Gallion first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for bringing this. This also concerned some of the young children of the ballooning national debt we have. You know, we haven't had no debt, I think, since Andrew Jackson was president, and probably hadn't had a balanced budget since the Clinton-Newt Gingrich years. So my question, so with this convention, you mentioned the 3 different things that you could talk about. So would one priority be a balanced budget amendment?
That I think is the goal of many involved in this movement, is balanced budget amendment. I think there would be flexibility to discuss other types of restraints that would fall short of totally balanced budget. You'd have to, obviously, we know that there are times where you have to borrow money for different things.
Like for a war or natural
Right.
disasters?
The stated goal, I think, is to have a balanced budget amendment, but I think you'd have to, I think that's why you get everybody together. And you say, let's talk about what makes sense fiscally so that we do not end up in further and further debt year after year. But obviously, I'm sure you need to have some, we know that you have to have some flexibility at the federal level for certain things. So I think that's part of the beauty of the convention system, is that you would be able to discuss that.
Okay, thank you. And we know we have a balanced budget at the state every year, so that'd be great
That's
if we
right.
could work
Yep.
to that at the federal level. Thank you.
Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Reedy, thank you for introducing this, and I also want to thank all of those involved with the Convention of States Action Maryland. I know we've had this issue before us in the past, but I have to tell you, this year, I thought it was really crystallized on the 3 points, the focus on what the amendments would be. I've heard from at least 150 of my constituents, I think, very concerned about the power of the federal government. So my question is, and this would be addressed to the senator, I see the 3 areas for the amendment proposals. Obviously, Senator Gallion just kind of focused on the balanced budget amendment, which I think has been a priority of this group in the past. But I specifically wanted to ask you about those amendments limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, especially, I think, in light where a lot of questions were raised coming out of the pandemic. But I didn't know if there were any, again, we've talked about the fiscal discipline, but on these limits of the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, if there was any areas that you or the Convention of States Action have focused on, or if it was more, a general limitation of the federal government.
I think that's part of the goal, is to discuss what parts that had been left to the states more originally have now been overtaken by federal action. What's the appropriate safeguard for that? I think some later testimony may give some insight to that. I know that the folks that are speaking have.
Senator Reedy, could you, speak
Sorry.
in the microphone?
I know that some of the folks that are speaking behind me have really coordinated their testimony to try to emphasize different aspects of it. I think the goal is to see there be, again, more of a limited national federal government focused on key priorities, and leaving things to the states that are that are more germane to the states and to local government. So I think you'll probably hear more about that as the testimony unfolds today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for this panel? Just one, Senator Reedy. Would a balanced budget amendment reverse the tax cut of 1718 under the former president that saw the deficit increase by $113 billion and tax receipts fall by $90 billion when the tax cut by the former president increased the deficit pretty substantially? I mean, would it reverse that tax cut?
Well, it very well might. Look, I think spending money increases deficits. So, I mean, I think we could point the finger at a lot of folks on why the deficit is so high and why our debt is so high. It may. Certainly you have to balance your spending with your taxes, with your tax revenue. I'm not sure, I might question your numbers on the economy seemed to be roaring pretty good up until the pandemic. So I'm not sure whether I take your numbers at face value, but we can debate that later. But no, I think it could, look, it would impose fiscal discipline, whichever way you want to look at it.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll go to the next panel. We will go with Mary Jane Perot, Coley Brown, Gail McCowan, and Carrie Wolford. And they will be followed by Elliot Weekly, Nicole Weekly, Robert Fisher, and Cody Tristan White. Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mary Jane Perot, a volunteer with the Convention of States, trying to preserve the freedoms that I've always taken for granted. 28,000 conscientious Marylanders and I hope that all members of this committee agree that the country's in trouble. As a volunteer, it was sobering to speak to several first-generation immigrants who wondered if they'd made a mistake coming to the United States. They said the U.S. is similar to the communist country they left, including censoring speech, growing crime, outright corruption, and spiraling debt. It's alarming to see the federal government take such sweeping measures and wasting billions to try to solve all problems for all people. That's not the role of the federal government. And as state legislators, you're more closely aware of our needs and how to best allocate resources in our communities, and yet you're becoming less relevant. We want to give the power back to you where it belongs through a convention of states. We're losing our economic freedom. Imagine a stack of dollar bills from here to the moon. Now, imagine 9 stacks of bills. That's our national debt, $30 trillion. It's astronomical. In fact, the ratio of debt to GDP is more than after World War II. And if this continues unchecked, financial default is inevitable, and it will devastate the freedoms of generations to come, who will be punished by our inactions. Do you really think Congress will reduce spending on its own? I think we can all agree this won't happen without an Article 5 Convention of States, which gives us not only the right, but an obligation to act. It's time to act, to determine your own fate, the fate of Maryland, and that of our country. Please vote favorably on SJ 8. Thank you.
Thank you. Coley Brown.
Hello, committee members. My name is Coley Brown. I live in District 36, where I represent 1,327 supporters as their Convention of States captain. I want a floor debate on SJ 8 to have Maryland participate in a national convention of states. This will allow Maryland a voice on the 3 topics of federal overreach, fiscal responsibility, and term limits. These are popular topics with Maryland voters. They are popular nationally, where 17 states have already agreed to participate in a convention of states to discuss these. Let me clarify why. The Convention of States is nonpartisan. This is not the first convention of states, nor is it without precedent. Our Bill of Rights, something we're all familiar with, came from the first. The convention is not chartered to pass any constitutional amendments. You have that right. The convention will only have authority to discuss these topics. If the convention agrees and recommends any, they go back to you, our representatives, and state legislatures to consider approving. Further, the constitutional amendments to be accepted, 3/4 of all the 50 state legislatures need to adopt an agreement. If only part of an individual state's legislature disagrees, then that state will not vote and endorse the amendment which has been recommended. Most importantly, if Maryland refuses to participate and attend a convention, your voters' voices and your opinions will not be heard. I implore you not to censure this debate. 28,000 of your voters have asked for a simple action and are watching for a direct result. Please let SJ8 come to the floor to debate its merits and its detractions and flaws. Thank you very much for your time.
I am Gail McCowan, and I'm a Baltimore City resident within Senator Ferguson's District 46, a one-year volunteer with the Convention of States, and I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel of the U.S. Army. Service members who take an oath to the Constitution truly understand the meaning of service to something greater than themselves. This virtue is long lost on career politicians in Washington who exhibit little to no desire to serve their constituents. And I didn't spend 21 years serving this great country to spend the rest of my time saving it from power-hungry politicians. The federal government has become much larger than the founding fathers intended. New committees, new commissions, new policies, new agencies, new regulations, and with each new initiative comes the need for funding, while creating new solutions to old problems when many of those problems could be solved right here at the state level. Marylanders believe this too. Our petition numbers are steadily growing within the state, and I have attended many events representing the Convention of States this past year, and Maryland citizens are talking, and they are disgusted and ready to exercise Article 5 for Maryland and for the people of Maryland who are tired of supporting federal politicians who don't support their desires and fail to represent them once they are elected. If we, the people, can't get our federally elected politicians to work on our behalf, nor hold them accountable, then the check and balance answer for the people is Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. So as a supporter and participant within the Convention of States, then the state of Maryland would then have the ability to address limitations on out-of-control federal overreach.
For your service to our nation. We're glad you're here. Ms. Wolford, good to see you again.
Yes, thank you. Hello, I'm Carrie Wolford from District 1. Service to our country runs deep on both sides of my family. My generational grandfather, Michael Paw, crossed the Delaware River with George Washington along with his brother Meshach Paw. While fighting in the Revolutionary War, they also camped at Valley Forge. The sacrifice they made to this country is still within my soul. I think about the stories. I hear about the conditions of our soldiers at Valley Forge. The soldiers were starving for lack of food. If they even had shoes at all, they were riddled with holes. Their uniforms were torn and tattered and not appropriate for long, cold winters. No blankets to keep them warm, and sickness was all around. Many of the soldiers froze to death. They were willing to sacrifice their lives in order for freedom. They were at times not receiving just compensation for their service. So at the end of the war, George Washington made sure that they were given parcels of land in Garrett County. I will cherish that land until I die. Most of the men in my immediate family also served in the military. I do not take the sacrifice for granted, and that is why I volunteer with Convention of States. It is the solution that is as big as the problem. My family was always willing to shed blood for our inalienable rights, not for a bureaucracy to take them away with a stroke of a pen. They fought for the right to self-govern, to earn our own way. Many Marylanders are in the movement to preserve our freedoms and to use Article 5 of our Constitution. We want to know whether you are willing to stand with us. We do not want you to sacrifice our state or our rights and hand over your power to some crazy agenda in Washington, D.C. We once united against the British in the Revolutionary War. We were united in calling the late Federal Convention. We need to unite again, now, for the peace and happiness of America before it is too late. As a descendant of generations who were willing to give everything they had so that you could have liberty and you could have the right to your individual pursuits of happiness, I am asking that you vote favorable on Resolution SJ8. Thank you.
Weekly and Nicholas Weekly. You all can come forward, followed by Robert Fisher. Those are the next three witnesses. Thank you all for being here. So may I just say that as you come forward, We appreciate your presence here, and we appreciate your sharing your voices, your opinions, and we may or may not ever agree on stuff, but we're glad that you're here, and you help us do our jobs better, so thank you. Elliot Weekly, followed by Nicole Weekly.
Hello, I am Elliot Weekly. I am in 6th grade and live in Hollywood, Maryland, but I have not always lived here. My dad is in the military and we used to move around a lot. In fact, I lived in 4 different states by the time I was 5. We don't have to move around much anymore, but when we did, it could be hard. When I was little, most of the time it was just me and my mom. Moving away from friends, having to spend birthdays apart, and missing my dad was not easy. They say that being a military kid makes you tough, and I can see that, but I am grateful we are here in Maryland and my dad does not deploy. I've learned about American government in school and just wrote an essay about federalism for the Convention of States Maryland Essay Contest. Learning about federalism was interesting. Our government was designed to split power between branches of government as well as levels of government. This was done to make sure that no one person became too powerful and so that the states were able to make decisions with their people. Unfortunately, we've kind of messed it up. Right now, the federal government and the president are making a lot of decisions that impact a lot of people in really bad ways. My parents do not want me to worry about this, but I know my dad is currently fighting taking the vaccine. He is a Marine and his job is to protect the Constitution. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects your right to practice your religion, and that right should not be taken away from you just because you're in the military. My parents also don't want me to worry about what's happening with Ukraine, but that is hard to. My family is Ukrainian and my aunt and uncle are actually stationed in Germany. Uncle Brett has an important job in the Army and deployed a lot to Afghanistan, and I worry about him having to go back to war. Until this summer, America was at war my entire life. I don't want friends, family, and I to go through it all again. I am testifying today because I know you're supposed to listen to me. I learned about the Convention of States when I learned about federalism, and that it will help more people get their ideas out there. And I think having people have more say in government is a good thing.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you so much. Elliot, you did a great job. Thank you so much for being with us. Maybe someday you'll be on this side. No clapping, you guys, sorry. Really appreciate the American Sign Language clapping, though. That's awesome. We appreciate that. Following up, Nicole Weekly. Is that Mom?
Yeah.
Welcome. You should be very proud of your daughter.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. My name is Dr. Nicole Weekly, and last year I voiced my concerns for the growing irresponsibility of government, fearing that if left unchecked, we were on a path toward destruction similar to the country that my family fled from. This concern has increased over this last year, and frankly, we're approaching a time I fear that we cannot turn back. Over the last 15 years, I've worked with children across home, school, and clinic settings with leading nonprofits and universities in our nation. As a scientist practitioner who cares deeply about education policies, I believe that SJ8 is a long-standing solution to the heart of the issue. Children, particularly those in marginalized populations, have often been described as canaries in the coal mine because negative outcomes will show in them first, and it is up to us to quickly adjust policy. I have never before experienced the despondency that I'm seeing in a field of mental health and education. The top-down policies that have come from Washington for generations have created a cascade of tertiary or secondary and tertiary effects that impact, without fail, those who are most at risk. This has never been more evident than during the last 2 years, where education and intervention services have been desecrated while referrals for mental health and issues are through the roof. I'm now fielding concerns for suicidal ideation in children who are as young as 8. The CDC data in 2020 indicates that suicide was the second leading cause of death in ages 9 to 14, and children between the ages of 9 and 19 were 18 times more likely to die from self-harm than they were from COVID. Yet our recent child health policies are entirely myopic and void of data-based decision-making. I joined this bipartisan effort to enact Article 5 because even though our system is struggling, we still have the ability to course correct. We know that focused, individualized interventions lead to the greatest results for our clients, and I would argue that is the same in politics. Strong relationships between the elected and their constituents lead to greater results for people in communities, and it's time we bring the governing back to you here at the state. Thank you.
Robert Fisher.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senators. I am Bob Fisher, Navy veteran and Veterans Coalition Director for the Convention of States, Maryland. I understand some of you are also veterans. Thank you very much for your service. I represent approximately 1,500 fellow Maryland veteran voters who signed our Convention of States petition. According to recent polls, about 75% of the U.S. voters support congressional term limits. The 22nd Amendment was established for presidential term limits, but did not limit legislative and judicial terms. Today, 15 U.S. Congress members are currently serving over 36 years. In 2022, the longest-serving Supreme Court justice has been serving for 30 years. 60% of the Senate and 40% of the Congress are over 65 years of age. Why should this frighten you? Well, according to the Harvard Health Organization, the chance of developing dementia increases 6% each year after age 65. Longer political tenures lead to stagnation, resistance to change, and obligations to special interests. In my opinion, we need to limit both chambers to 12-year terms. When it comes to adjusting term limits, the Congress needs to police itself. But do we truly believe that we can trust Congress to give up their biggest gravy train? In conclusion, esteemed senators, if we don't control this overreach, who will? You are the catalyst to initiate it, to make it happen. Please support SJ 8 and favorably vote it out of committee for a full debate and a recorded up or down vote. Thank you very much for your valued time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. The next panel is going to be Cody Tristan White, Deirdre Elvis Peterson, and Jennifer Brown. Colleagues, we have like one more panel if they squish together a little bit. All right, Cody Tristan White, Deirdre Elvis Peterson, Jennifer Brown. Take a seat and you can go in any order. Please begin.
My name is Cody. I am 10 years old and I'm from Mechanicsville, Maryland. You're probably thinking and asking yourselves, what is a 10-year-old doing here today? What does he know about governance and passing laws? Well, I am here today to support Bill SJ8. A couple of weeks ago, I won an essay about what is federalism and why did the framers and founders create such a government system for America. The Founding Fathers built America to have freedom from the excessive power of the monarchy of England. The founders and framers made sure that a government system would work to protect the people's rights and freedom. The Constitution was written and federalism was born in America. Federalism is the separation of power between the state and federal government, with the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. This way, the state and federal governments will not have too much power over the other. This country is a democratic republic, a hybrid system between democratic and republic government systems. The founders and framers wanted the best out of these two systems, with the purpose of protecting the rights of people as the number one priority. Why? Because without people, there is no government. Today, we children mostly hear and read news about Biden versus Trump, Democrats versus Republicans, war, inflation, corruption. It's all about pointing fingers. We children do not want self-serving politicians. We do not want war. We want good education and great leaders to teach us. You are our leaders. You are our examples. I humbly ask you, Senators, please support SJ8. Please do not forget what our founding fathers and framers set out to do. Do not let our federal government go unchecked. Protect us, your children, your future. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Good job. Deirdre Elvis Peterson.
Good afternoon. My name is Deirdre Elvis Peterson. I'm a naturalized American citizen, emigrated from Guyana, South America, at the age of 6 with my 3 siblings, our parents, and grandmother. My parents actually left their 4 children for 2 years in order to seek out the promise of a better life offered in the United States of America before our grandmother flew here with us. That was 1980. In my time growing up here, I learned how the American government was supposed to work. It was a unique design. There were measures put in place, checks and balances. Over the past few years, I've become a parent. Something changes with that responsibility. I began to pay attention in a different way. Other parents will understand. I started to see things I did not like for my children's future. For instance, I went to public school but couldn't send my children there due to the degradation of the public school system. I went to college but shudder at the thought of my children doing so because of the debt they would incur, the propaganda I feel is being pushed, and the lack of safety for my 3 daughters in what used to be their exclusive spaces. I grew up in Maryland, and sadly, I fear I may have to relocate to a state where the legislature will actively work to protect my freedoms. I've witnessed our federal government exercise powers that it should not be able to. I've witnessed lifetime politicians use their seats for their benefit, not that of their constituents. And some of these politicians have been in office as long or longer than I have been alive. That is disturbing. I've seen our national debt grow to something that generations to come will be struggling to pay off. I've seen states cooperate with the federal government to the detriment of their citizens because of the promise of federal funding. Hospitals were unable to make individualized care decisions and use their expertise during this pandemic because of the ties to federal funds. It is and continues to be appalling. Our government needs reeling in. We turn to our state legislatures to do the jobs they were elected to do. By voting favorable on this joint resolution, please vote favorable on SJ 8.
Thank you, Ms. Elvis Peterson. Thank you for your testimony. Jennifer Brown.
My name is Jennifer Brown, and I'm an adjunct political science instructor and a Convention of States volunteer for District 35. In 1 year, I've watched a dramatic shift in the political ideology amongst my students. Once supporters of centralized federalism, I see them shifting their views pretty significantly. I hear stories of job loss due to vaccine mandates and businesses being shut down. I hear about the cost of gas, retail items, and food, and the effect it has on students working and attending school simultaneously. In 2018, this body passed legislation that funds tuition at state community colleges, but if the federal government forces prices so high that students have to choose between school and work, what effect is legislation that gives them something they'll never use? Your work for the citizens of Maryland is being erased by poor policy decision-making at the federal level. Those same students are worried about completing degrees in fields where they can no longer work. They ask what happened to their right to work and their right to make their own choices. Students are surprisingly unified on this topic regardless of party affiliation. What they see happening at the federal level is awakening them, and they are paying attention and anxious for their opportunity to vote. They don't want the United States to become a nation where freedom is trampled and economic prosperity ceases. Like my students, I want to see something done to curtail federal overreach. As a former legislative aide here in Annapolis, I have seen that process work. Each one of you is far more inclined to listen to your constituents than any federal representative. All powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to you or to the people. As Maryland representatives, you have both the jurisdiction and the obligation to exercise those powers. And that is why I want you to support SJ 8. This convention is vital to restoring the proper balance of federalism. Article 5 allows you to play a pivotal role in calling for a convention to pass comprehensive amendments limiting the power and scope of the federal government, thus returning power to the states where it belongs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The next witnesses will be Will Zwart. Cody, good luck to you. Take care. Will Zwart, Stephen Patton, Robert Betts, and Richard Bibby. If the fourth one, maybe Mr. Bibby can stay on the front row or something, but the other three can come forward. Or if you're comfortable, you can all be in the, since there are 4 chairs there, you can also do that. Whatever is your comfort level. Whoever sits down first can start first. Welcome to, that's hilarious. Come on, David, take it. No, Stephen. All right. I'm sorry. Questions? Yes, afterwards, yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions, Senator Croza. All right, let's see. So I don't know who we're missing, but let's start. I think, Stephen, I know you, right?
Yes, I was going to follow up at the end, but I can go if you'd like me to.
Whatever is your preference. Please just begin. Will Zwart is the next one who's signed up. Mr. Zwart, go for it.
All right, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be brief. I'm Will Zwart. I live in Queen Anne's County, and I'm here today to bring to your attention a real and imminent threat. Everything we own, our futures, our families, our freedom, and our lives are being threatened right now. Not by any foreign enemy, but by our own federal government. The extremists in Washington have made it abundantly clear through mandates, federal supremacy, judicial activism, and even forceful intimidation that they do not want to represent America. They want to rule it. They don't want 50 states. They don't want 50 state legislatures. You've experienced this. Over 75% of the decisions made by the federal government should legally and lawfully be made by state legislatures. But Washington will never defer to the wisdom of the states because they don't trust you. Haven't they said already that, quote, state legislatures are blocking our progress? So either because you're in the minority or simply because you have the same letter next to your name that they do, they say you have to fall in lockstep. Well, Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution says you don't, and they know it. And they are desperately trying to divide us and suppress us because they're afraid that when we realize the power we have, we will wield that power and take back our country. From Georgia to Massachusetts, states are realizing this truth, that a convention of states will increase the power of the people, your power, and decrease that of those who seek to control you. This resolution will gain you back the wealth, authority, and respect that is legally and lawfully yours. You have a rare opportunity to cement yourselves in history as the heroes who saved America. Don't let it slip away. It is time for both sides of the aisle to unite against these intolerant federal thugs who are trying to destroy the aisle. I charge you to approve this resolution and bring it to the floor so that we might preserve liberty. Because make no mistake, once they've taken all my freedom, they're coming for yours. Thank you.
Again, in any order. Mr. Patton, if you want to go last, then Mr. Betts or Mr. Bibby, whoever you are, please.
I'm Mr. Betts.
Thank you.
My name is Bob, and I live in District 9, along with 781 other voters in Maryland who want you to call for a convention to propose amendments to the United States Constitution. According to the Maryland Manual Online, this committee reviews legislation on a variety of topics, including agriculture, fire prevention, and school policy, but not on calls for amendments conventions. Because of that, I and 28,000 other Marylanders ask you to hear our testimony and then pass SJ 8 to the full Senate for a discussion and vote. Now I'd like to discuss a piece of disinformation I feel the Senate should hear debunked. That's the claim that there are no rules for how to run a convention of states. That's almost true. The Constitution doesn't have rules for how to do anything. It's a framework, not a cookbook. The Constitution creates a Congress and gives it lawmaking power and tasks a president with executing those laws. Speaker of the House, Senate Majority Leader, and executive orders aren't mentioned, but we've got them all. Some days they seem like a good idea. The Constitution says we need a Supreme Court, but that's pretty much it. To quote constitutional scholar David Barton, John Roberts at a card table with a candle meets the constitutional requirement for a Supreme Court. And yet we've got a Supreme Court, and it rivets our national attention for weeks every time we elect a president. Maybe a few rules would have been a good idea there. Getting back to amendments, Congress has proposed amendments 33 times, and states have adopted them 27 times, without any constitutional guidance and the same authority granted to the states just 2 commas, 2 spaces, and 2 letters later. So what rules does the Constitution expect us to use? The same ones we always used before. The framers were well aware of how to make laws, how courts operate, and how to hold conventions of states. You're hearing testimony today about multiple conventions of states that we've already held in the U.S. The one we're asking you to call today will do the same thing, the same way, one more time. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. Could you please cover your nose?
Oh, sorry.
That would be great. We appreciate it. So is that Mr. Bibby who's coming up
Yes.
now? All right. You get the Best Dressed Award for the day.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Senate. You may begin your testimony.
Fellow Marylanders, I need you, and I need you today. Myself and Rick Bibby of Leitersburg, Maryland, need you to join us in a bipartisan effort to save our state and our country from its own procrastinating self by approving SJ 8. Today, speaking for myself and Rick, and over 1,100 petition signers from District 2 in Western Maryland, I and many others watching online hope to address those of you that might object to or have qualms about an Article 5 Convention of States even being held. Some of you will say that we'll be unleashing a Pandora's box upon our country and it will destroy everything that's long been held sacred. I stand against that claim, believing that our founders built in the Article 5 Convention to allow us to make needed corrections to save our union from the selfishness and the stalemates of blind partisanship. If I still believed in my heart of hearts that our elected U.S. House and Senate members would make these changes on their own, I would not be asking to testify here today. This same desire to be heard was once heard in 1776 by 56 regular citizens with an average age of just 45, and not one of those 56 could ever have been called a statesman. Yet they found the courage to believe in something much bigger than themselves, and they put it all in writing in less than 7,000 words. I now better understand the way they felt in 1776, and I'm asking you to allow the voices of everyday Marylanders to be heard on this matter, to shape a positive future for generations of Americans yet to come by simply focusing on the founders' immortal 7,000 words and not get lost in the current version of 1.4 million words. You can allow that to happen. This government of, by, and for the people must live on forever, and your committee's bipartisan support of this Article 5 will help do that. And we need you to do that right now. By simply rating SJ8 as favorable for floor debate, you'll be standing with a groundswell of 28,000 Marylanders and millions of Americans nationwide. I need you. Our state needs you. Our nation needs you. It needs us, and it needs all of us, and it needs us now. You know, it's not what I do nor what you do. What truly matters is when we do it together and we restore unity to our country.
Thank you, Mr. Bibby. And wrapping up, Mr. Patton, Stephen Patton.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for your service to our state and your constituents. I am Steve Patton, a resident of Carroll County, where I run my small business and I raise my family. For the past 4 years, I've had the great honor of volunteering alongside fellow Marylanders, a very small fraction of which you have heard from here today. As a Convention of States Maryland volunteer, I've spoken to hundreds, more likely thousands, of Marylanders that are upset with our out-of-control federal government. They feel that the federal government has no interest in their opinion, that they have been left without a voice, that they are being governed without their consent. When Convention of State volunteers are not spending their time preparing to impress upon committee members in the Senate the importance of adding Maryland to the 17 states already calling for an Article 5 Convention of States, we are educating our fellow citizens about our great country's founding principles and documents. I think an important part of why the Convention of States Maryland movement has grown to over 28,000 supporters is recognizing that the second clause of Article 5 of our Constitution is there so that the people, we the people, have a path to put an out-of-control federal government back in a constitutionally constrained box, a box the states that formed this federal government intended it to reside. Working alongside fellow Maryland Convention of States volunteers and supporters is thoroughly inspiring and a true honor. I ask the members of the committee to please take to heart the testimonies that you have heard here today, given by your fellow Maryland citizens, not paid lobbyists, not experts, just regular citizens that love their country. And please remember that you are only hearing from a very small fraction of our hundreds of active volunteers and tens of thousands of supporters here in Maryland. At this time, I'd like to request, Madam Vice Chair, that our volunteers and supporters that came from all over the state of Maryland here to Annapolis today, could they please stand and be recognized?
Absolutely, absolutely. Please feel free to stand up. Thank you. We're really glad you're here. Thank you very much, you guys. Love it. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Absolutely.
Madam Vice Chairman.
Yeah, that's all right. When I'm in the chair, it's kind of, yeah, that's protocol. That's all good. It's all good. But Senator Pinsky is the chair, to be clear. Okay, so we're going to take a few questions, and let me just say before we do, we all love our country, and so one of the great things about living in a democracy, and we know what's going on across the world here, but we're allowed to agree to disagree, and we can be respectful. And most of you all have been that, and for that I thank you. Not everyone, but a lot of you have. The second thing is that I know that we are all just done with masks, and they're annoying, and they're hard to breathe, and they're uncomfortable, and all that. And so I appreciate that, and we all appreciate, because we've got to wear these things all day, all night, and it's dreadful every day. And so we really appreciate your respect for our health and safety as we appreciate yours in keeping fully masked. So, and we're really grateful to the troopers who keep us safe and who have helped to enforce that today. So really want to thank you all. But mostly, we also just really want to thank you for being here. And with that, I'll start with Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Ms. Brown could return to the dais. I want to, first of all, I want to thank all of the volunteers and all the people that came from all over the state. And I also want to say how impressed I am with your organization in presenting it, because this is truly the first time I think it's been so clearly stated and laid out. And I know what you're asking us is for us to keep an open mind. So thank you. And I actually, yeah, I'm glad to support this and glad to co-sponsor it. My question is for Ms. Brown, because I was listening to your experience as a mother, as a political science instructor, and also your previous experience here. So you bring a really unique perspective. And I actually I read the Federalist Papers. That was what I studied in school. So you were jogging my memory here. But I wanted to ask you, in your testimony, you seem to talk about maybe what you experienced here and then what you're doing now as a political instructor, kind of a shifting and a sense of urgency of what you've seen in the past and what you see now. And I just wanted to know if there were certain areas. Was it just just more and more control at the federal level and kind of a push like the states really need to step up? Can you just expand on that?
Yes, I can. I've been teaching for about 11 years as an adjunct political science instructor, and what I have seen is that, a lot of students were not very aware of what their government did, and maybe not even very interested in what their government did, and very supportive of a lot of more federalized policies. But what I'm seeing now is, and really I can say this is a really dramatic shift in the last year or so. What I'm seeing is that students are, they're much more aware, they're much more willing to speak out, and they don't like the fact that they feel that the federal government is inhibiting their future. And again, I think I mentioned in my testimony things like vaccine mandates, businesses shutting down because they're losing their jobs. They can't pay for gas. They can't pay for food like they could before. So they're having to make a difficult decision between going to school and working. And a lot of them are having to opt to work because they have to survive. And I think that's unfortunate because, you all have done such a good job in trying to help them with tuition and help them in things that they need at the state level, but they're not being able to utilize those things because the things that are coming down from the federal government.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. So I guess I'm saying they do differentiate between what's going on at the federal level and what's going on at the state level.
Yes, they definitely do.
Okay.
They are specifically mentioning that they can see these things that are being passed down from the federal level that they're having a problem with at this point.
And they want us to deal with these issues.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rosa? I see no other questions from colleagues. So again, I want to thank everybody who traveled from around the state. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your activism. And be in touch with your legislators and make sure that you vote. Like, we live in a democracy still, so do that. Stay safe and healthy and get home safely. Take care. Thank you, Senator Reedy. That completes the hearing on Senate Joint Resolution number 8. And the last bill, the Senator